Welcome to the Regen Brands podcast. This is a place for consumers, operators, and investors to learn about the consumer brands supporting regenerative agriculture and how they're changing the world. This is your host, Kyle, joined by my co-host, AC, who's going to take us into the episode.
On this episode, Kyle and I are flying solo to bring you some updates and thoughts coming out of Expo West. For those who don't know, Expo West is the annual Super Bowl of CPG with over 67,000 attendees this year and a gathering of anyone and everyone working on CPG brands supporting regenerative agriculture, from certifiers to investors to the brands themselves and many more. Kyle and I spent some time covering our personal highlights, favorite new products, plus the state of the union for CPG capital investment and regenerative marketing claims. Curious to hear what y'all think about this one as we dove into a ton of topics and tried to embrace some radical vulnerability along the way. Let's dive in. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Regen Brands podcast. You're either going to be excited or disappointed today because it is just Kyle and myself. We are dropping in for a solo pod, the fourth solo pod, and we're going to do a little Expo West recap. So what's up, brother? Good morning.
Morning, man. I actually, as right when you said, okay, let's go, I almost just did the opening just to throw everybody off. But you got in there too quick. So, this is, it's always a unique opportunity when it's just the two of us. Like, we can completely disrupt the usual flow. So I'm looking forward to diving in, talking about, what happened at Expo, what we want to cover, some of the highlights, opportunities and things like that. So I'm excited.
Yeah, it's good. We have a nice little outline, which means we'll probably cover 75% of that, and then 25% will just be totally random that comes from our brains here at the time that we record. So I'm looking forward to that.
In previous episodes, and just so the audience knows, we don't schedule these. They basically happen when an audience or an interviewee can't make it, if there's a no-show. So we don't want to lose an episode. Do we have something meaningful to talk about? Yes. Okay, We'll do something. And oftentimes we don't have an outline at all. So this one feels way more organized than the previous ones, and it'll be interesting to see how this turns out and how well we stick to the script.
Yeah, and we have Expo West to thank for that, which we'll be focusing on kind of as the basis of the conversation to prompt the conversation. So would actually love to hear from the audience if they enjoy these episodes and if they want to hear more of them, because I think we'd be happy to do them as well. But yeah, man, let's dive in. I thought a fun place to start would just be kind of personal highlights. So what really stood out? What was the most fun and satisfying for you?
Yeah, I ironically didn't even put this on our outline, so we're already deviating. But when you said what was the most fun, I really have to say the ROC dinner. And what I loved about that was we got to see a lot of people in our community and in our network, and we didn't talk a lot about the challenges we're facing. It was just good fun. People trying to do right by the world, hanging out. And it was super fun. There's a lot of laughter. These are people that we talk to on a regular basis that we don't get to see in person very often. But that really stood out to me as one of the most fun nights where I really felt like I made some deeper connections with some of that community that I really appreciated. So shout out to Rock for putting that on. I thought it was great. Could have been more food. I will say that, but the food that was there was phenomenal. So that was great.
That's my main theme too, is just the human beings. And I think in this work, the challenges are very large and sometimes hard to humanize. It's hard to humanize solving climate change. It's hard to humanize solving human health. It's hard to humanize improving farmer livelihoods and improving soil health. But when you go get to see all these people that we're really trying to support and spotlight, that's damn, okay, I can do this work. This is why I do this work. And this is why it's really cool.
Yeah. And it's just to be it's so rare, at least in my life, and I'm sure in your life as well, to be at an event surrounded by other people who are just as passionate, if not more so than we are, about trying to solve these problems. That's just such a rare environment to be in. And I really appreciated just being surrounded by that level of positivity and intentionality.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really cool. I'm actually proud of myself. I did not overdo it on the samples this year. My admission is that I literally did not walk the main hall. I had so many meetings and I had so many sessions that I legit went to the spins booth in the main hall, and that's it. I did not walk the main hall. So I apologize to all of our friends that I was not able to see at their booth. I feel like I still almost got to see everyone. But curious if there was any new products or anything that stood out as kind of highlights on the product side.
Well, I like you, which is a testament to how poorly we planned. Also didn't walk the main hall in any capacity.
I planned. The plan just didn't work, so I was flag that.
It's Expo, man. The plan never works. This is how it goes. But yeah, I spent time in Hall E, North Hall, Fresh Ideas tent, and that was essentially it. But to your point, I think that's where the bulk of the Regen action takes place, regardless. If there is anybody we missed, to reiterate Anthony's point, like, we sincerely apologize.
Yeah.
But new stuff that we saw. I think the Force of Nature meatballs were phenomenal. I think that's a really great product extension for them into a new category that's not like too far outside the box, right? It's a super simple format, and that's what I love about what Force of Nature is doing. Is they're trying to make regenerative convenient, and I think that's really, really important for adoption. And this could be a really great play. So I'm curious to see how it pans out. But they were, number one, delicious. The packaging was great. I don't know what the price point is going to end up being, but I'm sure it'll be somewhat premium like the rest of their stuff, as it should be. So that was one that stood out to me. Part two was Big Picture Foods Shelf Stable line.
Let's go.
I'm a huge Big Picture Foods fan. I think everybody knows that. I love their olives in particular. And one of the most difficult things for that brand, go ahead.
I texted Daniela 2 days ago and I said, why are my salads 75% Big Picture banana peppers and 25% greens?
Yeah, my biggest question there is, why aren't you putting the olives in your salad?
I'm not a big olives guy. I'm not an olives guy.
It's okay. You buy the peppers, I'll buy the olives. It'll work out. But one of the biggest challenges for that brand has been merchandising. Most olives in a store are not perishable. They're not refrigerated. So that's where their current lineup lives. And it's really hard to get consumers to find a new brand in a different part of the store where they're not used to shopping it. So I'm super pumped that they now get to compete on the primary olive set in that shelf in that area, and it find those olive customers and introduce this brand to them, which is fantastic. So that's another one I'm super pumped about. And then the last one, I don't even know if this is a new product or not, but I tried the Thousand Hills brisket bacon for the first time, and my God, as somebody who doesn't consume barely any pork, it was fantastic, and I will absolutely be purchasing some.
Well, wait, brisket bacon, wouldn't it be beef? Wouldn't it be beef then, or no?
It is. That's what I mean, because I don't eat a lot of pork, so it's a beef bacon. I don't know how they do it, but it was phenomenal.
I'm gonna have to get my hands on some of that. Yeah, for me.
So those were my highlights, but yeah, give me yours. What stood out to you?
My number one is so random. I have a tie in first place between two different plantain chips.
Have you historically been a plantain guy, or is this totally?
I mean, I usually when I go to the store, I'll grab Artisan Tropic plantain chips, or I'll grab Zach's Mighty chips, tortilla chips. But Soul Simple and Will have a new plantain chip. I didn't see how they were going to package it, but they were serving it, and dude, it was unbelievable. Like, it was
Next
so
level.
good. And when I went to see Juan and the crew at the Artisan Tropic booth, they were trialing some new flavors on the existing plantain chips, and I can't reveal any secrets, but some of these new flavors were unbelievable.
Hell yeah.
So that was my tie for first. My close second was.
Wait, hold on, you didn't answer the question though. Like, historically, are you a plantain guy? Is that a category you purchase, or you're just so blown away by these new products you want to buy in?
Yes, but not with any real consistency. And I would say the two product experience I had would boost my consumption there to a more frequent, to a higher frequency. So that's why they stood out to me. So yeah, and I mean, bro. Close second, maybe also tied for first, was the new flavors of Alex ice cream. I mean, just absolutely unreal, lethal.
Yeah.
It's been really cool as a supporter and an investor to walk the Fresh Ideas tent 2 years in a row and just see that booth getting mobbed the entire time I'm in there for like an hour straight.
Yeah.
And
I want to pause and make two comments to reflect on the products you're sharing. Number one, Anthony's favorite color is yellow. So plantain chips, dude, like that is your category. You are now the champion of the plantain. And then from the Alex perspective, like we saw Alec the night before at the Rock dinner. Yeah. And I went to his booth, number one, hoping to talk to him. Number two, hoping to try some new ice cream. To your point, so mobbed, the dude can't even have a conversation. He's just slinging ice cream left and right. And the new flavors, I think I tried 2 of them. They were mind-blowingly good. And to your point, I think you said dangerously good, and that is spot on. They're phenomenal. Which one was your favorite?
The Palm Springs Banana Date Shake, I think is the name of it.
Yeah.
That's the one that won the NEXTY, and they're using rock bananas from Will and Soul Simple.
So cool.
And I learned, I forget the gentleman's name, who was also at Will's booth. We basically just use the Cavendish banana, which is the new like banana we see everywhere in the grocery stores. But their farmers are still growing one of the older varieties that's like much more flavorful. So everything Soul Simple bananas, I'm all for all the time. So I just love bananas and plantains. I guess that's what we're getting to on this episode.
This is going to be the name of the episode: AC's fascination with plantains / bananas. Okay, give me your number 3.
I'm going to go with the Kernza beer. I had not had it, and I had it at the Rock dinner. And, in my adult life, I've taken a lot of time away from alcohol. I'm drinking at the moment, not a ton. But
as a child, you were a heavy user, like
no,
5
like,
to 8, just going hard.
Coming out of college, just, had a little health journey. And with the autoimmune disease, it was the right thing to kind of take some time off. And now my body's in a spot where it can handle it. But I always like hated beer, man. But I feel like in my old age, I'm developing this actual love of beer. And the taste was solid. I really enjoyed, just sipping on a few of those at the Rock dinner. And I thought it was a winner and has the potential to do something in the marketplace for sure.
I love that feedback. I love that they're using Kernza. And again, they're figuring out how to get regenerative products into the hands of everyday consumers, right? And I think that's really important. I don't consume beer, but I heard, and I'm curious to get your take on this, that beer was lighter than anticipated for, I think it's a lager. Did you have similar feedback, or did you have a different experience?
Yeah, it was not overwhelming. I don't think it was as light as a light beer, but I don't want a heavy beer, and I definitely it was totally cool in my world. So I'm definitely not the right person to ask that question probably, but that would be my very unprofessional feedback.
Excuse me. I'm still sick from Expo, so we're going to keep dealing with this cough. But no, I think that's really good feedback. Now that we've highlighted some of our top products recap, let's get into some of like the Regen momentum, the news, like what actually took place on that front. And I guess like what feels like the most natural place to start the conversation is Climate Day. Give us some high level takeaways. Like what did you see and notice on Climate Day?
Yeah, I mean, the comment I made to you was the Climate Day conversation and programming was extremely validating and frustrating. It was validating in the sense that it feels like we're finally talking about the right things, and it feels like we're all like saying the right things. But it also was frustrating in the fact that it still feels as though the people really doing the work to try and, scale those solutions, implement those solutions, et cetera, are not necessarily supported, or they don't have the funding, or they don't have the traction, or whatever. And maybe that's a little negative. I'm a, high urgency perfectionist overachiever by nature. So that's probably just some of a me thing. But I thought that Courtney and Caitlin and team did an amazing job organizing the programming. I really learned a lot. My favorite part's always the people, and just getting to see everybody and getting all those folks in the same room is such a pleasure. But I really enjoyed the conversations. I thought that they were really well done. We still have a long way to go, but overall, a lot of good takeaways, a lot of good kind of focus points, I think, on some things that have not been discussed as much in the past, just by the ecosystem in general, not just at that event. That'd be my overall. How about you?
I'd echo a lot of those same things. And, I didn't attend Climate Day until last year. So this was Climate Day round 2 for me.
Yeah.
And equally frustrating for me at times, primarily because, to your point, like people are saying all the right things on stage, like, oh, we want to like invite people into Regen. We want to collaborate. And then when it comes time to actually like collaborating and letting people into the tent, it doesn't feel like that's necessarily happening, at least from my purview. Yeah. And I don't mean to discredit or disqualify any individuals who are up there on stage. And I think everybody does have good intentions, but where like the pedal meets the pavement, like it doesn't feel like we're getting that same level of commitment to big tent and or collaboration that we hear from the individuals on stage. And that's a little bit disheartening at times.
Yeah, it feels like we're building a lot of like regional highway or railroad systems without any sort of roadmap for what it's going to look like across the whole country in a way. And it seems like we are not acknowledging that might be a huge issue that we're going to have to pay the piper for down the line. God, I love when I just get an analogy off rip like that.
That was a phenomenal one, and I want to build on it. Like it also feels like a lot of redundancy. It's like people building the same roads, connecting to aiming to connect the same people to the same places. And it's like, why can't we work together to build one bigger road all at the same time? And reduce the amount of energy, effort, raw materials to continue way too far down with this metaphor, just to build this bigger road. So great analogy.
It feels like, even though we cannot synergize everything, we're leaving a lot of synergies on the table because we can't synergize everything, which seems like a mistake.
Yeah, no, very well said. And totally agree. Let's to use a very popular movie right now, let's find the common ground, focus on that, and figure out how we can work together to, build these roads or bridges or whatever you want to call them together. Yeah.
Which is another good segue. We know there's a common ground screening. I was not able to attend, but I heard it was very well attended. The content was great. So I thought that was kind of another good momentum point for the crew. And then we had some big news. I mean, going into the week, this is pretty typical that there's some big news at Expo. We're going right into Expo. If you read our newsletter, sorry for the redundancy, but I do think it's kind of worth listing some of these off. So we had 5 regenerative brands or products take home NEXTYs. That's huge. So shout out to Good Sam, Artisan Tropic, Alex Ice Cream, Burroughs Family Farms, and Patagonia Provisions. I mean, I thought that was amazing. That's a large percentage of the NEXTYs. We also had a couple really big scale brands kind of make some significant announcement. The first being Applegate, which is going to source their entire beef hot dog portfolio from 100% certified regenerative beef by the end of 2025. That's huge.
Yeah, I need to have a conversation with them about what they're doing with those bones.
So yes, you do.
That's definitely on my radar.
And then on the rock side, we had Lundberg become the leading U.S. rock food brand, and they basically are going to be having regenerative organic certified rice in 70 plus products here, rolling out soon or kind of already existing out in the marketplace. So that was huge. And then on the capital side, we obviously had Serenity Kids raise $52 million from Stride Consumer Partners, which I thought was an amazing kind of litmus and proof point for the marketplace of, hey, you can do regenerative, you can do it in a category, you can let it be kind of leading your innovation as they have. And if you have the right business, you can scale this thing pretty well and attract the kind of financing to, turn it into a powerhouse, brand. So I was very excited about that on the capital side.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, man. To see any sort of a regenerative brand closing that kind of a funding round, I think sends a really strong signal. I think baby food is another one of those sort of leading categories for a variety of reasons. When you think about categories that sort of ignite change, it's chocolate, it's wine. There's probably another big one that I'm missing, but baby food comes into play. And as somebody who doesn't have children and isn't planning to have children, it's almost frustrating. People care so much about their kids, but they don't really care about themselves in that same fashion. But I also get why people care about their kids, and they want to ensure that they're getting the most nutrients possible in the least toxic, food packaging and things like that. So I think it's one of those gateway categories where if a parent can understand what regenerative is and make sure they're giving that to their infant, they're going to want to continue with that same level of quality throughout their development, right? So it's a great kind of starting point, and I'm really excited to see that sort of capital infusion in that space.
Yeah, I had one of the emails in my inbox with a trends list, and it was talking about, I forget the term they used, but basically this gap between baby food and adult food. So it's young life, early years nutrition. I forget the term they used, but there is this gap, right? It's you do baby food until whatever age, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, I don't know, and then you go right into Annie's mac and cheese or granola bars or whatever, which, hey, those still might be better for you, but are they really healthy? Which is where I see things like the Force of Nature meatballs. That is a great play because I'm buying a ton of Force of Nature Ancestral blend all the time. But if I had kids, I know it would be much harder for me to kind of ground and brown that meat and season it and sauce it up. Bam, I just buy the meatballs if I'm a
roll it into a ball, put it in the oven, bake it, bring it back out, freeze it, use it again. Yeah, exactly. A lot of process.
Yeah. So I think there's I agree that there's a huge gap there. And I think we'll see some some brands either like creating category or line extensions to cover that gap, or people refreshing existing brand portfolios, or kind of new entrants that are focused on this childhood window, which would be like post toddler to like preteen. I think there's opportunities there.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, man. And if you think like back to my quote adolescent days, it's like Gushers, fruit roll up,
Fruit roll-ups.
like this. It's like the most artificial time period of like consumption, which is such a bummer. And I hope your theory is correct, and I think it will be. That we'll see a lot more development there, and maybe some new entrants. And I'm excited to see what they come up with, because it's needed. And obviously also needed in the adult space, but we've got plenty of brands already kind of working on that solve. So if we can bridge that gap, fantastic.
Yeah. One other positive thing I saw was more just like exciting new things and more presence from some of the other certifications. So Rock was rocking in the Fresh Ideas tent. The dinner was amazing. They continue to do amazing things. It was good to see Regenified. They've hired some new team members. They had some panels. They had some more brands. They had some cool news. I know Christine from their team and then Gabe Brown were on the New Hope podcast coming out of Expo. We'll have that in the next newsletter. So it was great to see them with a larger presence. It was great to see A Greener World have a table in the Fresh Ideas tent. I know, they have a Regenerative protocol and some good brands there. And then we saw the SCI kind of rebrand and talk to a lot of those brands that are in the pilot program. And we know things are coming very soon with folks getting that label on pack and doing some great work there. So it was good to see kind of this diversity of certification landscape continue to grow and evolve and kind of branch out.
Yeah, that almost makes me want to jump to the OSC moment, and I don't know if now is the time to go there or not. So I guess before we go there, let's keep it at like the Expo West. Like, what did we see? One other trend I saw more than just about anything else, which is not Regen related at all, but I think it's important to just talk about trends. Was the transition to aluminum. That was like an overarching theme. I saw way more aluminum in all sorts of different categories than I ever have before. Not necessarily regenerative. Aluminum has its pros and cons, certainly, but it's a hell of a lot better than single-use plastic. So just another positive trend that we can give some credit to. So I was happy to see it, but overall to me, from like a total Expo perspective, I didn't get this like overwhelming, like, oh, everybody's doing this, or like the year of cold brew, or, so many kombuchas. Last year, it felt like this weird resurgence of coconut water. But that was sort of like my biggest high level trend takeaway. Did you see anything on your end that really stood out?
Having not walked the main hall, I feel like I have a very limited sample size to answer that question. I'm trying to think. There wasn't a ton. I feel like I saw a lot of mushroom, like functional mushroom usage.
Okay. Yeah.
But I don't know if that's that new. And I feel like maybe some of that has replaced some of the plant-based meat, fake meat type stuff. That definitely has regressed significantly, which I am happy to see. Maybe others are not. So I kind of was like looking out for that and was excited by the fact that I didn't see a ton of it. I mean, my overall takeaway is the same one I posted about on LinkedIn last year, which is just there's still so much bullshit. There's just still so much
no doubt
money and time and energy being thrown at things that I don't really know if they're solving any real problem. Like they're definitely not solving any societal problems, but I don't even feel like they're innovating in a category or, have a real solid growth trajectory or plan. So I don't know. It's very easy for me to say that armchair quarterback, but that continues to be like my big takeaway is just a lot of fluff.
Yeah, man. I don't mean to throw any particular brands under the gun here, but when you say that, I can't help but think about the plant-based caviar company.
Yeah.
Like, like
what are we doing?
Capital, exactly. There's so much quote innovation that's coming out there that really feels like it's just trying to ride the coattails of existing trends. Like, oh, where hasn't plant-based gone yet? And if the only answer to that question is caviar, like, do we need a plant-based caviar? I don't know. Maybe there's somebody who's thrilled about that. I have yet to meet that individual personally. But yeah, to your point, there's so much that is under the guise of health food or better for people or better for planet that I just don't really think is very authentic. And I think that's why you and I are so stimulated and love to spend so much time with regenerative brands, because it feels so real and so authentic and so connected to the agricultural practices that like it's just the most fun place to spend our time.
Yeah, which leads to this tension point that we've talked about a lot that we continue to need to reinforce, which is there should be some economic incentive and a way to build regenerative into the business that you get compensated for it. But the reality is there's not. So you have to translate it into one of the leading value props or one of the other things that really matters more, like taste, health and nutrition, price, if you have, some decent scale, et cetera. And I think we have to continue to kind of beat that horse because, it's so important. And it's so clear that when you go to this show, that is what drives purchase. That is what drives growth. We have good retailer interest, right? And they're putting an emphasis on regenerative in the mix, but we still got to have these consumer groups that are really supporting these brands and driving velocities and profitability.
I think you're spot on. And again, this is something that we don't have on the outline, but I think it's important to highlight, like, you actually moderated a panel that talked about a lot of these topics. And I would love to get your sort of high level takeaways. Like, what did you feel you received back from the panelists? And how do we like package it up and roll up so our audience can sort of like, if they weren't there, what did they miss?
Yeah, I think they recorded it and they will like post it on YouTube for anyone to watch. So I'll get that information out at the right time. I'll just flag that. It was a really great panel. We had Nick from Little Sesame, we had Brita from Lundberg, we had Sherry from Nielsen IQ, and we had Guy from Vitacost. So we had two brands, a data provider and a retailer. What I thought was the most interesting thing was really a lot of Guy's perspective on the retailer side. And Vitacost is, it's an e-commerce player that doesn't sell maybe the full mix that you would see at a brick and mortar grocery store. However, he was pretty hesitant to say there's any real data or hard kind of line things on the sustainability claim side that are, that they're building, that they're like underwriting business unit economics with, which that's probably not a great sign for a lot of us investing in that. Or it's just a good indicator that like, it can't be the main thing. So it definitely feels like for retailers and consumers, it can be a good tiebreaker and it's still important. But overall, my grand takeaway was we're still stuck in this not translating preference to purchase. And what I mean by that is, we have all this data that says people prefer sustainable products or people would pay more for sustainable products, but I don't know if that's actually showing up in the end data, which once again, it's not trying to be negative. It's just trying to be realistic of what do we need to do tactically with these products and these brands and the overall movement.
Yeah, I really appreciate that feedback. And I also was most stimulated by what Guy had to say, which I was not expecting at all for that panel. And what I was most impressed by was his level of empathy for the challenges regenerative brands face. And what was also most interesting was the fact that like retailers are just not set up to help absorb some of that incremental cost. He's talking about the cost of certification, the cost of raw materials, and all these things. And he's very aware of those challenges regenerative brands face. But he also like flat out said, I don't know if there's going to be a way for retailers to absorb that additional cost. Like it has to get passed through to consumers. And to your point, what you just mentioned, like we have yet to see that data really translate. And that brings me to something I wanted to talk about later, but we'll talk about it now and we'll probably revisit it later. But like, to me, the key there is like the lack of consumer education, like we continue to talk about, and we'll just leave it at that for now. We'll dive in a little bit further. But that's really like the problem that I feel every year at Leaving Expo West, like we have to continue to prioritize that problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's gotta be a multi-stakeholder engagement and solution. It can't just be, hey, brands, go figure that out. And we'll get you on the shelf, but like, that's where we stop. And so
right.
I think on the Regen side, retailers are willing to do more than they've done, but they maybe haven't been given the tools or the program to do something as effective as it needs to be. The most interesting point I think he made was like, he was like, hey, we want third-party certifications to validate claims and be, avoid greenwashing and be high integrity. And I don't think that brands should have to pay a bunch of money for that. So it's like talking out of both sides. And he admitted that, right? And these are the things we're struggling with, which are, hey, it's really almost you're taxed to do the right thing, but also go figure it out in this capitalistic model and figure it out in the unit economics and make it work. And it's like, man, we have to build things that can endure in the current constraints while also trying to think at a high level of how we change the system overall to lighten that load in the long term.
Yeah, man. And I'll bring it back to an experience I just had this week. I sat down with Whole Foods earlier this week and learned a little bit more about their good, better, best pricing system. And essentially, they look at every category and they want to have a good player in that category, a better, and a best, and maybe 2 to 3 variants in each one. And Whole Foods also mentioned to me that like their primary, one of their primary goals right now is unit velocity. They want to be more affordable, more competitive with the rest of the market, and really focus on unit velocity. And they're comparing themselves more so with like the conventional channel than they are the natural channel.
Wow.
So those are 2 takeaways. And then the third part is like any regenerative brand automatically becomes best. So they automatically take a higher margin on a regenerative brand because they qualify as a best brand, but they want to focus on unit velocity, which having a higher price point makes it harder to achieve higher turns. So that feels contradictory. And it's another one of those like pain points that regenerative brands just face this like massive uphill battle. And until we can figure out how to like collectively solve some of these problems, or maybe even individually, to your point, it's going to continue to be that much harder as a regenerative brand to really succeed in this environment. So just want to call that out as another pain point that is, we'll call it an opportunity to improve for the industry.
Yeah. And I think we should round out this part of the conversation by just saying like we embrace the Stockdale paradox, I think is what it's called in the book Good to Great, which is like addressing the brutal facts and having eternal optimism. And so I do want to add like there was all these really cool data points of brands doing really well, brands growing, brands making great margin and good unit economics and scaling and getting new distribution and all these things. And so, we have all that and we need to celebrate all that, and we need to square up with the things that need to be dealt at a micro and a macro level to kind of solve for as a group.
Totally agree. But yeah, let's take this as an opportunity to pivot. You've got a whole section in here of 4 high bullet points with multiple sub bullet points beneath in a section in the outline called capital. As you are the capital expert between the two of us, without a doubt, would love to get some of your high level takeaways from a capital perspective. Like, what did you see? Not necessarily at Expo, but in the meetings and like that. Give us a recap.
Yeah, lots of things. And it was good to catch up with a lot of folks. So kind of just taking things away from various conversations with brands, investors, other stakeholders, different sessions, different reports that have been coming out. I mean, my biggest theme is like, number one, profitability and paced growth. This is going to continue to be the theme as we have this kind of contraction in capital and interest, and we have this reset in the overall kind of macro economy and the venture economy, which has also trickled down into CPG venture. So, my advice to brands is really to focus on profitability. It's to focus on paced growth, and it's to raise money in smaller chunks. If you are raising money with very clearly defined outcomes that you can say, Mr. and Mrs. Investor, give me these $5. I'm going to go do exactly this with the $5. And then you can come back for another $5. But you can show very clearly, we did exactly what we said we were going to do. Here are the KPIs. Here are the achievements. I think that's going to be the game we're playing for the foreseeable future for at least the next 24 to 36 months and beyond. And it's honestly better business fundamentals. And it's really, if you research brands that have success, most of them have grown that way anyway. So I actually think it's overall really good. There are just going to be some brands that have gotten caught, spending some money, having some high valuations that are going to get reset in this window. And what we're going to see is, and what we're already seeing is, a lot of the capital is going to shift later stage. So they're going to shift to, we used to want to see a brand with $5 million in TTM. Now it's 10, or it used to be 10 and now it's 20. So you're going to see a lot more bigger bets, I think, in those later stage rounds, or in the, the growth stage VC or the private equity stuff, more so than the emerging brand side, which is all the more reason why we need to continue to spotlight, I think, the needs of those sub 5, sub 10, sub $20 million brands, because these are the folks that are building regenerative supply chains of the utmost integrity. And we have to find a way to support them and scale them, as long as they're good businesses as well, right? So that we can have kind of some scaled solutions that maintain that integrity throughout their growth.
I think that's a great call, man. And as my like tactical retail brain kicks in with what you're saying, to me, that's almost like, how do you essentially utilize these investment and capital dollars to fund the expansion portion of your business, while at the same time ensuring that once that expansion is complete, your next year of turns is going to be profitable, right? And what does that look like? So essentially, like if you're a Southern California based brand, for example, that's where Expo West is, we'll start there. And you then want to expand into Northern California. So you're opening up new distribution, new distributors. new retail. So it's a lot of free fills. It's a lot of money and investment you're throwing into that. And that's where you can like use these dollars to expand that growth, pay for the initial wave of distribution. And then your job as an operator is to ensure good trade spend rates, strategic promotions, utilization of key partners like brokers or merchandisers or whoever, to keep your turns at the right velocity so that once that first year cycles through and you don't have to pay slotting in year two, that's a profitable year, right? So I guess from your investment side, like, does that feel like the right sort of like action plan? Is that what you're looking for? Is there something else that I'm missing?
Yeah, I think what I'm looking for is people showing a very clear plan that they're right sizing retailer mix and unit economics and retail unit economics. So what I mean by that is show me what accounts you're really making money in that are worthwhile to kind of continue to invest in. Show me ones that you might not be, that you have a very clear plan to either improve or let go of. And from a growth strategy perspective, show me a distribution plan that is going to be, as profitable as soon as possible, that you actually have the means to support good velocities in turns. And so I think it's about unit economics, individual unit retail economics, and then overall kind of account economics. Those would be the three layers that I'd be really looking at with a fine tooth comb.
I love that. I love that feedback. I think it's super beneficial for any of the brands who are looking to raise, like, how do I do this the right way? How do I tell the right story to my investment, audience? That makes a lot of sense. Are there any other major capital takeaways that you want to cover before we pivot to the next section?
I think similar theme as some of the other stuff we've talked about, like a lot of momentum, a lot of cool stuff. And we have these big, hairy problems that are really hard to solve that have a lot less momentum, a lot less conversation, and a lot less support than they need. I was really excited to see One Step Closer. We'll link their organization in the show notes. They hosted a session on capital and kind of new and innovative like ways to fund brands, everything from equity to debt to new structures to all kinds of stuff. It was a really cool session. But once again, just like with some of the Regen sessions, it was a big room and it was really well attended. But if you think about it compared to the overall attendance of the event, it's just like, man, we need to 10x the people in this room. We need to 10x the people working on this. And we need to 10x the capital going into trialing these potential solutions. I think the problem is becoming clearer. The community working on them, very earnestly needs to even be better at articulating the problem, which I'm doing some work on the back end on our side from the Regenerative brand perspective. And then we have to go be willing to find people that are going to invest impact first or first lost or research and development type capital into funding mechanisms that we say, hey, we have stress tested this to our best ability to think it's going to work and it's going to have a pro forma and a return and a financial model like X, but we really don't know because it is so outside the status quo, but we need to go try it. And then we need to come back and say, hey, these parts worked, these parts didn't work. Let's go, inject more money into the strategies that we feel good about based on those learnings. And so, the overall theme there is the needs for innovative financing and financial innovation are really outpacing the support coming to greet those. So I love that session that they put together. I love the work that Elliot Began is doing at TIG Brands and some other folks in that community. And that there's some really cool innovative ideas. I think now we need to see the organization and the capital come behind those ideas for us to go put together proof of concepts to then go scale, with more assets under management. That'd be takeaway number 2.
I think it's great. And I think from an order of operations perspective, which, is like one of my favorite things to talk about, like it's good to have those different vehicles developed so that the quote drivers or investors can come in and figure out like, hey, which one of these am I willing to participate in? And of course it's not great that at the moment, to your point, like the capital pool has yet to catch up to the investment vehicles that are available. But it's good that we have that developed and some people working on it. I am not super close to all of that work. So I commend you and your ability to like stay close there and share that with our audience because it's critical to the success of this movement.
Yeah. And if we think about CPG, like we pour a bunch of money into product innovation, formulation innovation, like innovating within SKUs or new SKUs or within categories. And everyone's obsessed with that. And that really drives growth. We have to think of finance the same way. Like we can't just innovate in only certain sections of the business. We have to innovate from a financing perspective and a capitalization perspective. And we're just going to have to continue to go tell the actual funders of the funders, the people that the fund managers really raise money from, that story, and get them to catalyze some capital. And when I look at the regen landscape, there's three things that I'm very interested in and having very high level just kind of dialogues around. One is debt equity hybrid structures. So what we see is the typical venture just equity kind of play is not working for a lot of these brands, especially the brands that might have less of a clear path or a longer path to $100 million in revenue and an exit to a strategic. So debt or some debt equity hybrid is usually a better path for those brands. How do we structure that? How do we do that? What does that look like at various different stages? What do the returns look like? What does the governance look like for the operation? I'm very interested in kind of exploring those models and seeing if we can put something more formal together there. I also think there's a huge opportunity for inventory financing on the regen side. So we've had this proliferation in fintech, CPG inventory financing solutions, but ultimately, especially as interest rates have gone up, they're still pretty predatory and they still are not bespoke enough for a lot of the regenerative brands. And they don't put any value on the ecosystem services or the non-monetary value of the goods being produced and being bought from whatever farm they're being bought from. So it was really cool to see recently how Steward is partnering with Lowbucks for a line of credit on their inventory purchasing. And if we can scale that into a fund or some sort of more formal structure with a lot more AUM behind it and get some impact lending and impact debt into the system, I think that would help a lot of the brands operate a lot better and cleaner. And then the other thing that people have been talking about and kind of throwing into the ether is there some sort of, lower market private equity strategy where we can roll up some of these smaller brands and synergize across like back office or across sales and marketing if they have similar categories or in the same category. I think your biggest issue there is going to be the human element of you have a bunch of really cool founders that don't want to give up control of their baby to that regard. But is there a way to do that that's not like a majority shareholder private equity model where we could still collaborate and synergize? Or, is there another way to kind of create that outcome without it having to come through that model of investment? So yeah, I know I just hit you with a lot, so I'll stop there.
That was a lot, but I think the piece that resonated the most with me is the way you compared financial innovation within the space to product innovation within the space. And especially when you think about, maybe the last 10 years of CPG, natural CPG with exits like RX Bar, the evaluations we're seeing for Liquid Death, Chameleon Cold Brew, all these organizations where like the model was essentially VC backed, 5 to 7 year turn and burn, no regard for impact on planetary health. Now, credit to Liquid Death, putting water in a can is way better than water in a bottle. So, that's good stuff. I don't want to say that none of those brands care at all about impact. But when you think about the different level of commitment to impact that the regenerative brands are facing, like it's a completely different model. And that same 5 to 7 year turn and burn cycle, like doesn't necessarily fit. So to your point, like as these brands are innovating to do better for the long term, the financial mechanisms need to accommodate for that because we're not going to have the same outcomes, or at least we don't want to, right? So those financial vehicles have to change. So I just really like the way you laid that out.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it seems like we should move to the most salacious probably part of the conversation, which we've titled claims. So in our world, regenerative means a lot of things to a lot of different people, and I think where I've kind of gotten to is that it means different things in different contexts of the supply chain. So what I mean by that is you could have a farm that adopts regenerative practices. You could also have a farm that's fully regenerative. You could have a product that's making a regenerative claim about just incentivizing practice adoption or making incremental improvement. You could have a product claim that's fully regenerative. And there still is not this agreement in the space around how we really navigate that from a CPG perspective. A lot of people doing awesome work. It's pretty fair that it's at that point because it all is still nascent and pretty new. But that's what we want to focus on. So I'll see where you want to take it in terms of your high level thoughts to kick it off.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think the first place I think about trying to go is the OSC event.
Yeah.
And I don't remember what that event was called. I do think I know like what the primary intention was, but I guess before we even go there, like, do you remember what the event was called and like why it was important that it was put on?
From my understanding, which we could be wrong, and I'm more than happy to be corrected here, it was an event in support of how the ROA and ROC and some of the leaders from that community are trying to get organic established as the baseline in these conversations with CDFA, the California Department of Agriculture. So my understanding was it was not really designed to be kind of an open roundtable discussion as it turned into. It was really designed to present their case and garner support for it from people that would agree with that. And I think what it turned into was a lot of people from the Regen community coming, trying to voice an opinion that maybe that is not the approach that they agreed with. That was my understanding, which once again could be wrong.
No, I'm spot on there, and I think it's important to highlight for the audience like why this California decision is so important. California is a massive agricultural state, not just in the United States, but it's actually a massive agricultural economy globally. And what California might say or do could have ripple effects beyond California, not just from a United States perspective, but from a global perspective. So how California defines regenerative agriculture actually has global implications for the entire movement. So as small as California might seem, it has a lot of weight to throw around. And Izzy, I think you were spot on. I think, and I think that the group who put it on OSC and ROC and ROA and Bryce did a phenomenal job of kind of laying their arguments and saying, hey, this is what we believe. This is why we believe regenerative needs to be organic. And that's essentially, quote, the point they're trying to make, right? That regenerative and organic need to be tied together. And I also believe, Anthony, you're spot on that it sort of de facto became this roundtable discussion about like, well, does that need to be the case? And I should say kudos to everybody in that room for showing up and having what to me felt like a relatively productive conversation that wasn't necessarily like claws out. And I do feel like there was some level of empathy, understanding, and legitimate listening that took place. And it was like truly an honor just to be in the room with these various organizations that have wildly different interpretations of these terms.
But they're all people that are doing amazing work that's really important. So that's the most interesting piece. And I think, sorry to cut you off, but like the word empathy stood out to me so much. And I found myself feeling so empathetic to really all sides that even we're in disagreement with each other. And I was like, God, I just heard that person and that makes so much sense. And I totally understand why they're saying that. And then someone might say the complete opposite thing. And I'd be like, God, that makes so much sense. And I totally understand why they're saying that. That was very present, I felt.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm glad you cut me off, but I also completely lost my train of thought and I don't recall where I was going. Go ahead.
Yeah, my other big takeaway is that I feel like as a community, we're running from that conversation. Like we're having it in back rooms with the people that we agree with, or we're having it on Zoom calls. But like what the session turned into was largely probably half or 75% of the time a presentation. And then maybe 25 to 50% of the time was a discussion that lasted 30, 40 minutes, maybe total before it was like formally adjourned.
I was going to say formally, it felt even less than that to me. I think it might've been like 20 minutes of actual discussion.
And it feels like to me, we need someone to convene that group and maybe even a little bit broader and literally lock us in a room for an entire day, if necessary, and to have like a fully like open Roman Senate like hearing where we just say all of it, because it feels like there actually is so much there's so much agreement and progress just buried underneath our ego and politics and lack of organization and commitment to just having that open forum. Now, that may be way too hopeful and optimistic and dumb, so feel free for people to think that, but like I really do believe that in my heart of hearts.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it will be extremely challenging to try to put that on, but if we can make it happen, there's no doubt in my mind, like to your point earlier, all of these individuals, these humans, and these organizations are trying to do the right thing from their own perspective. And there's so much, I mean, if it's 30% alignment, 50% alignment, 70% alignment, whatever the number might be.
Mm-hmm.
Let's hone in on what that is and figure out how we partner to work together to solve for those problems. I also had like a shower thought coming out of that meeting, literally like in the shower, like days later.
Yeah.
And it was that regenerative and organic can't mean the same thing. And that is so inherent in the name regenerative organic. You know, if I started a consulting agency that was called Smart Intelligent Consulting, nobody would ever want me to be their consultant because those two things mean the same thing, right? So for regenerative organic certified, those two words inherently mean different things. And we have to honor that. And they chose those words for a reason. And I don't even know if they understand why they chose the two words, and that because they did, they can't be tied. They can't be married. You know, and I still want to give all the credit in the world to that organization and the individuals behind it. But I hope that they can see the same thing, that allowing market validation for regenerative products who are not yet organic is not a threat, but it is an opportunity to get more arable land into a regenerative organic state eventually. And I think that was one of my biggest takeaways that I really empathize with, especially hearing Bryce, you know, who works for Lundberg, who is a brand, you know, and he was talking about share and losing share, having organic and regenerative organic losing share to these regenerative brands and how that can threaten their businesses. And from my vantage point as a brand, I can 100% understand that level of complexity. Like if I sell bone broth, if there's a different company that doesn't use real bones that's taking share from bone broth, like I'm going to be like, hey, this isn't legit. They're taking share. It's deceiving to consumers. Like I can understand that. But I think it's a little bit different for this regenerative organic argument. And it really is about getting people to start the adoption practice, because in my mind, and I'm not a farmer, but in my mind, the reason farmers are not yet organic and don't want to commit to that jump is fear. They are afraid that the transition, they're not going to get paid the premium they deserve. They're going to have to reduce these inputs they've been relying upon and eventually like maybe not make as much money or go out of business. And in my mind, the way you overcome that fear is not by saying you have to be this. It's that, hey, try this, start to build that soil fertility, and then you'll automatically become less dependent on those inputs. And eventually you can get to the point where you don't need them. And that has to be something they learn on their own. They can't be told.
Yeah. It's really about trying to like bifurcate or trifurcate what we're talking about. And for a community that all makes money on marketing products and using words and advertising, it's almost like we've completely forgot how to use nuanced messaging to create some sort of framework that has a little bit of nuance. And I'm going to riff on something that is not prepared whatsoever. So we'll see how this comes out. But it almost feels like to me, if we assume that the vast majority of consumers won't care, or at least they won't make a purchasing decision purely because of a product's regenerativeness, and it's mainly a B2B instrument for food integrity and decision-making and, you know, claims work and sustainability efforts, then why can't we have a more nuanced system? If the consumer ultimately is not going to care, and like my opinion with, if you look at organic, like something even more complicated and esoteric than organics can be really hard to teach people about. We should do it for the people that will care. I think it's important. So I'm all for that. And from a macro perspective, I'm almost under the impression now that we can have like, let's call it 3-tier, just to throw spaghetti at the wall, right? Which is our product or supply chain is incentivizing regenerative practice adoption. We are not saying it's fully regenerative system. We are not saying the farms are fully regenerative. We are just saying like, hey, the sale of this product and the work behind it is getting more regenerative practice adopted on the land. Good. That might be step one, bottom left. In the middle could be some sort of step up from that. That's not this product is fully regenerative with a third-party cert claim, but some sort of elevation of that, right? That's further on the path. And I feel the least confident about how to perfectly articulate that. And then in the top right, you have, this is a fully regenerative product with a third-party certification from a fully regenerative operation that looks like X, right? Why can't we have that? Like, that's not that hard. There's a lot of details and questions around that. I understand all that, but that to me is something that I think the industry could understand, and I think the consumer could understand, at least the ones that care, and the most are not. And what really sparked this whole thought was like, my girlfriend goes to the store and buys Silk almond milk yogurt the other day. And I send Kyle the picture of the top of the lid that she sends me, and it says, this yogurt supports regenerative practices or something like that. That's okay. That brand's owned by Danone. I don't know if their regenerative work is legit, but if it's legit, that claim is not the same as saying this yogurt is regenerative. It is saying that this supply chain is incentivizing and increasing a net positive benefit to the environment, to planetary health, to human health through the adoption of practices. And I feel like we need to establish that lower rung, establish this higher rung that is the fully regenerative, third-party certified, et cetera, and then clear up what's in the middle. That's not that hard to do that. Now, a lot of questions on how that translates to how you describe the farming and the farmland and how you might certify the farm itself. But from a product claim perspective, which is the world that we live in and are trying to solve for, I don't think that's that hard. And now I'll stop.
Yeah, man. I'm torn about it. My gut reaction when you sent me that photo, as you know, was words I can't say on the podcast. So, part of me would love to make that happen. I love the model you're talking about, but then, I'll play devil's advocate. If Silk, Danone, and I don't mean to diminish any of their regenerative efforts. I'm not super close to them. They could be as legit as they are or not. We don't know. Happy to make that disclaimer. If anyone can just throw regenerative on the label and say, hey, this incentivizes regenerative practice, and it's really 0.1% of what they're actually doing, should they be able to make that claim? And that I think is some of the big tension points in some of the other bigger regenerative certifications. That's what they're worried about. And I very much understand that concern. But to your point, I very much agree that we need to figure out whether it's a tiered system or not, how we provide that market validation for brands who are trying to do the right thing. Because again, at the end of the day, and this kind of stems back to that Whole Foods issue we talked about before, if regenerative has to be organic, and if people have to pay a premium for regenerative products, the impact the movement can make for both human and planetary health is going to be significantly diminished. And unless we can start to incentivize arable land in mass to adopt these principles and practices, we are not going to mitigate and or reverse climate change. And we are not going to make a significant impact on improving human health. And if we're not doing those two things, what are we doing?
Yeah. We have to solve for three things at once. At the very top, we have to solve for giving validation and supporting the absolute pinnacle of the work so that it can continue and realize the value it deserves at the very top. In 100%. The middle, we have to incentivize and validate that there is constant progress happening to reach that pinnacle. And then at the very bottom, we have to make it achievable, worthwhile, and incentivized to get on the path and get to levels 2 and 3. Those are things you kind of have to solve separately. And I think your point is well taken around what I just proposed solved maybe for messaging and organization, but it didn't solve for governance yet. So what is the governance structure to actually validate the claims or make sure that wherever you are on the path and whatever you're saying is legit and has integrity and transparency and data? And I feel like it's just crazy at this point that we have all these certifications, we have all these blockchain and AI and soil health monitoring companies and all this stuff. And we still kind of haven't reached this harmonization on what that needs to look like, which I also empathize with, because I think fundamentally regenerative is something we can't put into our westernized, hyper-metric, hyper-masculine binary paradigms if it's truly about, living systems and supporting those to flourish, to help flourish all life.
Yeah, man. Well said. And that's the problem I think we all struggle with. How do you tick the box that's not tickable? And it's, again, a very difficult problem to try to solve for. But, there are fantastic people and organizations doing that work, and we will continue to try to collaborate. And I really feel positive coming out of that OSC event about the types of conversations we had with the individuals. I mean, we were in a circle with ROC, SCI. Unfortunately, I think Regenerative had left the room by that point. But some people from the organic team, and had a very not contentious, I don't know what the right word is, a meaty, a hearty, a meaningful conversation about like
it
where
was
everybody's
tense,
lines were.
but it wasn't contentious.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's well said. And it really felt to me like, to your point, had we all had the time and bandwidth and energy to stay in that room for even one full hour, let alone 4 or 5 with a break in a session, like there could have been so much positivity that came out of that. And I don't know how we emulate that or make that happen, but my God, it needs to happen.
Yeah, and I think one thing you learn as you grow up in life is that most of the time, finding a solution and common ground with other human beings is about making sure the other person feels heard and seen, number one.
No doubt.
No one is actively working against that, but we're not actively creating opportunities for us all to feel that way, which is probably just step number one. And I did feel like that happened for the first time in a in-person, large group, diverse stakeholder setting that I've been a part of. Maybe it's happening other places that we're not aware of, but that was the first time I saw it. And man, I got to salute you because, to just share kind of a little vulnerable story. We walked into that meeting and I kind of looked at Kyle and I was like, hey bro, let's take a back seat here. Like there's some big folks in this room that should probably supersede us in terms of their opinion on this topic or their contribution. And when we got into the small group, Kyle shared a really passionate, vulnerable story of his own. And it felt like really created the launch pad for the unity and the cohesion that did exist in the conversation. So one, good job for not listening to me. And two, I just appreciate your vulnerability and your action, man. And, this, like, we don't know how it's going to work out for us to even record podcasts and say all this openly. People might not like it. People might hate us for it. People might punish us for it. I don't know. You don't know. But it does continue to feel like it's our role in the space to try and say some of the things that maybe some others can't say or won't say. And I was definitely having some real hesitancy there that you broke down in me. And I just appreciate you stepping up like that for this community, because I think it's important.
I super appreciate that, man. And I think you were also spot on that like we should let some of these other individuals lead this conversation. But at the end of the day, I trusted my gut and I really felt like our unique perspective wasn't really being voiced, and we provide a level of value to this community because of our unique perspective. And to your point about empathy, like my goal, and I hope I delivered it well enough, was to ensure that the various parties were heard before I tried to make my point, and to open with some level of vulnerability to prove authenticity and hopefully allow, because, I think vulnerability is one of those things that you can lead with vulnerability and it will allow others to become more vulnerable, So I'm glad it seemed to work the way I had planned that it would, and would love to be in the room and share those moments with those individuals anytime. And yeah, it felt great to be able to contribute in some capacity to that conversation, hopefully bring people closer together rather than further apart, which I don't want to demonize ourselves, but I often feel like we are sometimes the known as those who like maybe create friction rather than create like a center of like togetherness, So I'm glad we were able to maybe reverse that in an in-person setting a little bit.
Yeah. I told Kyle while we were at Expo that we need to put up our picture from Expo 2 years ago and put the bad boys, what you gonna do? Put that audio behind it. But yeah, man, just to wrap, I think what we're trying to say at a high level is that it feels as though the people that are actually really aligned and doing the higher integrity work and all have the same intention can't figure out a way how to actionize it to the level that it needs to for us to see the change we all want to see in the world. And we are just deeply committed to doing whatever is in our power and whatever the community calls upon us to do to help facilitate that. And, I had the great pleasure of going to White Oak Pastures for a little field visit when they were having Gabe Brown come speak. And it ended up being literally just like the 10 White Oak interns, Gabe Brown, and maybe like 2 other farmers this day. So I got a lot of really cool intimate time with Will Harris and Gabe Brown and everyone else that was there. And I really remember from that day, something that I can't remember if one of them said it and the other one echoed it, but they said it a lot. And it was, nature is more collaborative than competitive. And I would really just love all of us to take that mindset into the work moving forward, because I really think that's the unlock to, this not just being this little thing that we're all scared to lose control of or see grow up, but this humongous thing that we were all a massive, part of really seeing flourish into this big, beautiful, positive change in the world.
Yeah, man, I love that. And this is going to seem totally random, but I'm watching The Three Body Problem right now on Netflix, which I've read the books before. Phenomenal reads. So far, the series seems to be doing pretty good. A decent job at following the books. But there's a statement in the book.
What is it? I've never heard of it. What is it?
Oh, dude, Three Body. It's a mind-blowing sci-fi series written by a Chinese author. I probably won't pronounce his name correctly, so I'm not going to try, but it is an extraordinary read. It also made me feel like I really needed a physics degree to truly appreciate all of that book.
Yeah.
Like I probably only got 80%. But they talk about the book Silver Spring is like one of the big like catalysts for some of the things that take place within that series. And there's a quote that they quote frequently, and it's that nothing exists in nature alone. And it's just like, from our regenerative brains, it's so easy for me to be like, yeah, monoculture is unnatural, right? So to your point about this, the nature statement that you made earlier, it's that concept to me. I'm really excited by Three Body because that's a massive Netflix series. It's going to blow up. And those ideas can start to resonate with individuals who may not even know what regenerative is yet. But I think that's really cool and important. There was another point I was going to try to make here, but I completely, again, lost my train of thought. Unfortunately. I got it back. It was, just having this conversation with you makes me realize the importance of, a couple themes just in recapping the episode. Like number one, the importance of in-person connection, the importance of empathy, and getting the right people in the room. Right. And maybe, and I'm saying this out loud on the podcast for the first time, like maybe that is our job. Maybe we put on the event or invite the individuals and hold the space to have these conversations, because that really feels like the linchpin. And if we can get everybody to agree on that 25, 30%, whatever it is, and start to take action, I think we can make waves together. And that's an exciting opportunity and exciting concept. So we'll riff on that more offline. But I'm super pumped about that idea. And I've never been this energized by that concept until today.
Yeah, it's really cool and really exciting. And you and I have also reflected this week in some other conversations that it feels like the deeper you go into any of these problems, the more big and overwhelming and outside of yourself it becomes, and you lose agency and you lose motivation to make a positive change. And I think that's where the in-person connection and where the community piece comes in, because you remember it's not just you. And it is all of us as individuals being relentless champions for this positive change that we want to see. But also it's this deeper understanding that it's so much bigger than all of us individually, which
totally
it felt like there was this really cool bubbling of that now needs to become this like big boiling pot of hot water here soon.
Yeah, I totally agree. It was like somebody pulled us off the burner too quick. So we got to get back on that burner.
Yeah. Cool, brother. Well, it feels like this is a good time to wrap. I mean, I think my closing thoughts are just, we are so grateful to do this work. We are so grateful to support this community. We're so grateful to all the people that we interact with and all the people driving positive change in the world of regenerative CPG. And there's so much momentum and there's so much hope and there's still so much work to be done. So, let's embrace that vulnerability. Let's embrace that empathy, and let's go, get our lunch bells and get some shit done.
Totally agree. And I guess our answer to our final question, as always, how do we get to 50% market share for regenerative brands is basically the last hour conversation we just had. So we'll close there.
Yeah. Which had nothing to do with, not nothing, but very little to do with tactical strategy and a lot more to do with the human soul in so many ways,
Totally
which
agree.
is interesting. It's interesting to flag that and just sit with that,
Yeah. Right on.
Cool, brother. Appreciate you, man.
Appreciate you. Thanks for listening, audience. We appreciate you too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, shit. Actually, one last highlight. Sorry to continue this perpetually forever. One of my other favorite moments of Expo West was people I did not know at all.
Oh, yes. I'm so happy you brought this up. Yes.
Yeah, people we did not know in any capacity, seeing us, whether it's our faces or our name tags or whatever, just coming up and shaking our hand and be like, hey, love the podcast, love the work you're doing, love this episode, listen to this. And it was so cool and stimulating to know that like complete strangers get value out of the conversations that we're having, and that it means something to other people. Like that is so energizing. And in the moment, it might be hard to continue those conversations at Expo West, but want to give everybody who may or may not have done that like a shout out, because it continues to drive us to do what we do. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah. If anyone thinks we're in it for the money, it is not here, and we are most certainly not. So that is the fuel to the fire for sure. And that's what we're trying to do. That's the purpose that we have. So couldn't echo that more. And yeah, man, appreciate you and love all you listeners. So thanks y'all.
For show notes, episode transcripts, and more information on our guests and what we discuss on the show, check out our website, regen-brands.com. That is regen-brands.com. You can also find our Regen recaps on the website. Regen recaps take less than 5 minutes to read and cover all the key points of the full hour-long conversations. You can check out our YouTube channel, Regen Brands Podcast, for all of our episodes with both video and audio. The best way to support our work is to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform, subscribe to future episodes, and share the show with your friends. Thanks for tuning in to the Regen Brands Podcast, brought to you by the Regen Coalition and Outlaw Ventures. We hope you learned something new in this episode, and it empowers you to use your voice, your time, and your dollars to help us build a better and more regenerative food system. Love you guys.